Welcome. My name is Kelly Williams, and I'm an artist in Portland, Oregon. I do all kinds of paintings, and this one is the beginning of an encaustic painting. And today I'm going to walk you through how I do my collage process before I even begin the encaustic process. So I get started by gathering some of my favorite books. These can help me get clues or create breadcrumbs for me to follow. I may have an idea of where I'm going, but often this process is extremely intuitive, and I start gathering pages that may have special words or sentences and themes that start to arise as I go. So, this is an old German religious book, and a piece of advice if you're going to work in a foreign language because you like the text or the shape of the words or whatnot, always translate it. There's somebody somewhere that knows the language, and you don't want to put something in there that is hyper offensive unless that's your intention. So, be thoughtful in your choices. This is a piece that I got from my mother's belongings after she passed, and it's an autograph book from high school. And in it, people are talking about their experience in high school and whatnot. But what caught my attention was all the talk of relationships with boys and getting married and, sexuality and things that were charged for the 1960s and how there was so much expectation about getting married and things like that. So that provided the first breadcrumb for me to follow. So here I'm doing some free writing, and I am actually writing something, but being very, expressive in the handwriting so that it's not something anybody will ever see even a clue of later. But again, it helps me land my theme or follow a path. And so, I'm talking about the roles of women and maybe the expectations of my mother's generation and what are the expectations of our generation and what have we lived through in that process. So I'm using a Stabilo pencil, which is water soluble, and it's usually just the first thing I grab. But in this case, I'm going from writing really small, I'm overlapping, doing big loopies, and I don't know if this will inform my next choices or not, but it is a way for me to get super grounded in the process and really start to zone out a little bit, but also zone in. And so I really encourage people to do some writing on the raw board or the gesso board before they start. And it can help solidify your theme and give you a little bit of focus as you make future choices. So this is a bottle with a needle tool on top, and it's got India ink inside, which I work a lot with. I think it's just one, I just love the way it flows. And again, this is me getting like really freed up, and that needle tool will make interesting marks. It's basically just another layer of writing. And again, I am writing something specific, but doing it in a very loose and fluid way. And the ink is water stable, but when you first lay it down, it can be moved around a lot still before it dries completely. So, again, have fun. This is the playful part, and don't overthink it. A quick technical issue with using the needle tool is that when you're done using it, it's really important that you take the needle tool off. I store mine in just a little tray of water so that when I'm ready to use it again, it's cleared and the ink hasn't dried and blocked the whole thing up. I've lost several needle tools that way. So this is an air blower bulb, and this is just fun. I do this when I'm working in a large scale and I lay down large swaths of ink. I actually have used a leaf blower, and I mean, I'm working large, so that gives you an idea. So when I'm working small, I need to find a tool that is size appropriate. And this little guy, it's also good for my wrist muscles. So I get my exercise and I get to make cool little squigglies with the ink that's still wet on the board. I've switched to 2 hands because my wrist is giving out. So the other thing you can do is just go to your heat gun and turn the air up really high, and that serves 2 purposes. One is to blow the ink around a little bit, but really my primary purpose at this point is to also get it to dry because I'm trying to move through this piece pretty quick and get ready to start doing the collage parts. And this is just laying down, just I'm making marks. I'm creating value shifts. I'm thinking, I'm listening to my music. I'm grabbing whatever brush is laying around and moving that around. And again, I don't have a plan. I really am in the hyper intuitive state and I have an idea. And there's a really big difference between those two. I felt it was time to grab a little color and see what might happen with that. This is just a Stabilo woody pencil, and it's also a water soluble mark making tool. And I do a lot of work with these. Again, these are awesome when you're trying to just do intuitive line making, mark making, drawing, that sort of thing. So it's a great tool to have in your toolbox. With it being water soluble, it's easy to just grab a wet brush and move it around and blend the colors together and, create different shapes and forms or just enjoy the process again of, making a mark and moving the paint. That's kind of my thing. Make a mark, move the paint. So while my other paint is melting, I'm just kind of playing with all kinds of drawing materials. And this is one of the things I like to do is doodle and make patterns, kind of like Zentangle. And again, none of this is going to be seen. So I can write words, I can create shapes, and just really enjoy and play. And again, this is the relaxing part for me. And as I started making this pattern right here, I thought, hey, there might be a mermaid in my future. This is where you get inspired without even knowing. I'm doodling and enjoying the process of making a mark. Let go and don't hold yourself up to some high standard of drawing something very specific. Here I've grabbed the Stabilo pencil that's white, same idea as the woody, and just creating some white shapes and patterns over those black areas. Well, everything is drying. You go and you gather all your other materials, your papers, your collage elements. I like to burn the edges and create really interesting organic shapes. So, one of the collage elements I grabbed was a register page from my mother's old checkbook. And this suddenly kind of made everything click for me. I think that, we are always accounting for the value of a woman. And my mother lived in a scarcity model. So, taking these registers and burning them, I think are going to become a theme underneath a lot of my Erotic Saint pieces because there is something about, we're always being measured and accounted for and, down to we measure our bodies constantly. And so there's a lot going on with the use of a check register as a collage element. And then I also like the fact that there's like cool change in the ink and the writing and that sort of thing. So that turned out to be like one of my favorite little discoveries in all the materials that I collected after my mother passed. In order to, consider some safety issues, I don't blow after I've lit a piece of paper. I always smother it with the lid of another tin. And I'm working on a metallic surface. I'm also working on a cookie sheet. When you burn and smother the flame, it creates ashes from that paper, which then can be used as a material element later on in your encaustic piece. And clearly, the fact that I chose encaustic as my primary medium, burning stuff is just cool. There's no there's no two ways about it. So I don't always use open flame or a lighter. Sometimes I'll light some incense. And what's cool about incense is, it's got a lot of, other meaning and can create some really interesting ash to work with, but it creates circles. You can really control the edge burn. I like to buy incense when I'm traveling, so when I come home, that can be a part of the content that I'm putting into the piece by burning incense from that specific place. Okay, it's time to start gluing things down. So I've mixed up my collage glue ahead of time, and it's made from a wallpaper paste that is created by mixing water with a powder, and it's from Germany. I'll put the link somewhere somehow for you to grab it. Or you can check out other artists that like to use the same little combo. But basically, you mix a little bit of the wallpaper paste, which is cellulose based, so it is not acrylic based, and then you hit it with a shot of Mod Podge, and the two that will help stabilize it. So you are not creating some kind of surface that the encaustic will not stick to. So you want to apply the glue both to the paper and the board because glue to glue will always give you the best adhesion. And I'm grabbing my tools, and I like to burnish with these either catalyst tools or silicone wedges. If you're not going to be adding encaustic, you can add things like other glues and mediums that are acrylic based, but I know I'm going to be adding encaustic later, so I'm keeping everything encaustic friendly. So I'm continuing to tear edges and create different sizes and a variety of different shapes. Again, not thinking too much about it, but also just intuitively following some basic rules of composition, variety, repetition. And, you can lay it down and pick it up. It doesn't stick immediately. You've got a lot of play time, so you can kind of, smooch it around. Also, I've got all the torn, burnt pages on the side as well. I'm going to start with these pieces first because I don't want that ash to necessarily get the surface all dirty. That'll happen later in the piece. And do consider things like the color of the pages you're using, the different size of font or the different type of font. Even the thickness of the paper can add for some interesting shifts in the composition. Most of this stuff is going to get buried so deep in the final piece that you can't see it, but you never know. And I find the process to be just as important as the finished product. I think intuition and intention are a balancing act. And this is a good example of I'm following my intuition and leaning hard on years and years of knowledge of understanding color and composition and all those elements of design. Because the surface isn't fixed in any way and it is water soluble and the glue I'm using is wet, that means that I'm often kind of picking up little bits of that red and black and it's mixing in with the glue, almost giving it a little bit of a toning effect. And I like that. It creates unity and allows me to be messy and just kind of go with the flow. But if you're not into that and you want everything super crisp and clean, just make sure you wipe your tool between each pass because you will pick up those undercolors. So I am stopping and reading some of these pages, even though I chose them initially because of what they said. I can end up flipping them over and forget what it was that grabbed my attention, or maybe I catch something completely different later on. So do stop and read what you're laying down if that's important to you, because that can help inform your next choices and really give another breadcrumb into the direction that you're going, or maybe even surprise you and give you a little nugget that helps you build the meaning that's in the underlayer. Sometimes I'll even circle the words that are catching my attention or underline them or black out the words that I don't want to show. So, again, creating another level of interest and pattern that can be showing through later in the piece. So I know that this checkbook page is going to be central somehow to the piece. And so I'm being a little bit more specific about where I want it to land, not just within the context of the collage, but also knowing where I'm going to try to position the image that I'm going to be using later for the Erotic Saint piece. So, I want that organic handwriting to show through. I want those lines of the check register to be there. Again, all of that echoing my ideas around, the account that we keep of the value of a woman. Now, I've also pulled out the rock that I like to burnish with when I'm kind of ready to add another layer of meaning using tools that are important to me. Also, it's time to lay down a burnishing page to help protect all the collage that I've done. Things can start scooching around. I want to be able to burnish much firmer at this level and keep checking the edges. You're really wanting everything to become a singular layer at this stage before you start adding any more. Now it's time to start considering where I want to place the image. I'd done a little bit of preparatory work, and that's why the check register ended up where it was. And now I'm deciding, do I want her facing left or do I want her facing right? It's important when you print your image on your laser printer that whatever image that you're printing is going to be the reverse. So in this case, I noticed that the foot is cut off. This can happen when you're working with other imagery. So it was just off the page when I printed her out. So I'm going to have to compensate for that. I'm either going to have to finish painting the foot, drawing the foot, covering the foot, or somehow integrating it into the background. I'm deciding where those final pieces of collage are going to go because I need to make sure that I have the whitest space where her face is going to be so that value shift will allow the ink from the transfer to stand against the white of the background. Because I've recently burnt these pieces, what's happening is the ash is getting knocked off and toning the rest of the background. And to me, that's fine. It's unifying the space and getting that tonality to the rest of it. So I'm definitely choosing pieces out of my mother's autograph book that reflect a lot of the social norms and expectations of women of that era. I found it really interesting that that's the kind of stuff that the girls were writing back and forth to each other in high school, because it was just an assumption that they were going to get married and have a man in their life and those kinds of things. So I continue to use that idea of accounting a woman's worth. And now that the register is right front and center, it's going to make for a great image transfer. So I'm going to just keep collaging here and moving things around. The glue's getting pretty wet and the piece is still pretty wet. So as I'm continuing to collage and burnish things down, sometimes things rip and come up like here, but I'm actually not mad. I kind of like that it gave me another piece. And so now I'm even kind of pushing it on purpose. But, I'm just going to grab stuff and keep going. Again, this is more intuitive and just stacking and layering to get a sense of activity and activating the base and putting ingredients in that are going to build kind of the stock of the soup. And that's going to give me the complexity and flavor that underpins the rest of the story. So before I put in the main ingredients like the image transfer and the other elements, this is really the part to me that really informs which direction I'm going to go. And I've clearly decided that the check register is going to be the central piece that's going to lay underneath the body of my image transfer. So I'm making sure to keep that available and light and bright so that the image transfer is completely readable with a good value shift. So I'm checking edges and continuing to tear and make smaller pieces that I'm adding back in and overlapping. And again, just keeping the action really interesting underneath the whole piece. Okay, time for one last really heavy burnish to make sure everything is set and really creating that final layer that everything else will be added onto. So nice and slow and make sure nothing's coming up, and then I let that dry completely. So I've decided to add some more ink again and just laid a little bit down and took an old paper towel roll and I'm changing the shape. Sure enough, just messing around, I've made myself a chain, which again is echoing a lot of the other themes that are happening in the piece, and taking some old book pages and just blotting some of that wet ink, which is going to create some interesting collage paper for later. I don't know if that'll end up back in the piece or not, but just trying to take those big blobs off the face of the piece. So I'm preparing the next stage here with my clay, chalk, and mineral-based paints. I use the brand American Paint Company, but there are multiple brands out there. The key point being that they're not acrylic-based. So I've decided to choose some colors that match some of the autograph pages that I've collaged in so that I can create a sense of unity and knock back all this busyness. And of course, the irony is that the color I chose is called Mermaid. So again, I think I'm getting some clues from the painting gods which direction this piece is going to go. I'm also going to add a yellow to my limited palette in order to get some variation in the different tints that I'm using. I am using lots of white, and then by mixing the yellow and that turquoise together, I'm going to get some interesting greens. So I'm really happy with this palette, and this is going to kind of lead me into the base that the image transfer is going to be put on while still giving me some interesting color. I'm adding just a touch of water to thin it out. And what I'm trying to do is really just unify the piece, knock back all those dark places, make sure that I'm adding in some extra lights where I need them, where the body's going to land. And although I'm being pretty loosey goosey here as well, I am starting to really focus more on value and unification. So I've let it dry completely, and I mean bone dry. It's been sitting here for a couple days. There's no coldness to the touch, which means it's fully dry all the way through. And I'm using the sandpaper to sort of blend as well as knock down any edges that might be sticking out and make sure that everything goes together really nicely. I've got a wet paper towel and I'm literally erasing some of the paint so I can get back to some of the writing underneath without pulling up too much of that black. Using a hake brush, I'm putting on the hot encaustic medium, checking for any bubbles or loose collage and scraping that back here in the beginning so that that encaustic can penetrate the paper surfaces. I am going to put on several thin layers and then fuse very carefully. I am doing it in like a reading motion, so left to right, and then I pick it up and then I go left to right again. That gives me a very even surface of heat. And I'll go over safety with encaustic in another video. So please do check that out. The most important thing is have good ventilation and never let your encaustic smoke and keep it under about 210. I've laid down multiple layers of encaustic medium, fusing in between to get as flat of a surface as I can, because that's going to be what takes the image transfer best. I'm also enjoying this part and taking a really close look at all of that complexity that I've got going underneath, seeing if there's any other clues or breadcrumbs that might sort of steer the direction I go with my imagery as I move forward. So, take the time and enjoy this part of it. And for some people, this may be close to the end of their painting. For me, it's actually just the beginning.